Well, let's now bring in our Sky News US contributor, Michael Ware. Michael, good to see you. Some really positive news here. It sounds like we might start seeing some women and children being released in the coming days.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. For once, isn't it good to hear great news coming out of this conflict in Gaza? So, yeah, we're talking about 50 hostages, women and children, for every Israeli or for every Hamas-held hostage. It's 3 Palestinian prisoners, most of them women and young men and youths. So, look, as the previous speaker was saying, Israel is used to this. I remember the case that he was just talking about back in 2006. Hezbollah on Israel's north came across the border and kidnapped 2 soldiers. Israel then went into a month-long war in southern Lebanon to get them back, but they could never retrieve them. It took 5 years of negotiation. And there, the Israeli paid a price, a ratio of 1 soldier for 1,000 prisoners. Now, some people question that back at the time, whether that was too generous, but there's another school of thought that I think binds Israel together, that every Israeli life matters, and every Israeli life is worth whatever price has to be paid.
The Times of Israel now reporting that Israel is saying it believes Hamas could potentially locate some 30 more mothers and children, and that the 4-day halt could be extended by an extra day per each 10 Israeli hostages freed. So it could be a bit of a moving feast, of course, over the coming days. A lot of the families, Michael Ware, are though saying, why has this taken so long? I mean, these people have been held for some 6 weeks or so now.
Yeah, look, I feel for all of those families. And let's not just forget, they're not just Israeli families. There's at least 9 Americans. There's more than a dozen Thai who are immigrant workers. So this is everyone. And some of the families of the Israelis themselves have been camping out the Ministry of Defence and at the Prime Minister's office, asking for more to be done, for a ceasefire to happen, just to get our loved ones back. Some of these families are going to be overjoyed. I think the others may be able to take some heart from the fact that at least there's a first framework. And where there's a first framework, hopefully there's more frameworks for which that we can build on. Look, Hamas clearly has an intention for these hostages. They obviously want to use them as human shields, as we've seen them be doing. But they also obviously want a price for them. Part of that price is the release of prisoners. We'll have to see how we go, as we understand, Hamas still holds at least another 160, 180 odd hostages. But it's a first framework, that there could be another.
And we know that as part of this deal, the plan was for the Red Cross to be allowed into Gaza. They'd be carrying out health checks and also providing aid to the hostages that are still held there. In terms of the aid situation and what this means on the Palestinian side of things, we're looking at about 150 Palestinians to be released and an extra aid for those who are suffering on the ground within Gaza.
Yeah, and look, obviously, Hamas can parlay that into some kind of support on the Palestinian street. Hamas can, playing devil's advocate, can say, look what we've achieved. We've released all these prisoners, these Palestinians who shouldn't have been in Israeli custody in the first place. It might have taken us taking their hostages, and it may have cost us this war, but look, we're getting a payoff. But also, let's not forget this. These negotiations would have been going on almost certainly from day one. I have very little doubt of that. I think, virtually on October 7th itself, when these hostages were taken, Israel or the US or the Egyptians were directly calling Qatar to start negotiating with Hamas for these hostages, because that's where Hamas's political leadership is. And Qatar has been the key conduit. They have been the country in the middle that's allowed all these communications to happen and was key in facilitating this new arrangement. So the first 50, that's something to celebrate. There's a lot to go, but that is something to truly celebrate.
Absolutely. And Benjamin Netanyahu, as we know, has been under intense pressure within Israel. His political leadership, of course, under a lot of pressure as well. But this issue of the hostages has been obviously very tricky to navigate for him. How would you characterise the way the Israeli government has handled that situation up until this point?
Well, that's been obviously an extraordinarily sophisticated problem politically for the Netanyahu government to find the calculus that would work for their military objectives, for their intelligence objectives, for the purposes of getting the hostages back, and for keeping the Israeli street united. Because, yes, they want the hostages back. Everyone would like to see a ceasefire, but, the intention here is to completely destroy and dismantle Hamas. So, there had to be signs of progress. This is a sign of progress. It's something that I think the Israelis inevitably had to engage in, but you can tell from the Prime Minister's words himself, by no means does this mean the end of the war. Because he says, Hamas wants to wipe Israel off the planet. We want to destroy Hamas completely. And that's their goal. And he says, even after this pause for the hostages, we're going to keep on going in destroying Hamas.
Michael Ware, really appreciate your analysis as always. Thank you. A huge few days coming up in terms of developments out of Gaza, with hostages expected to start being freed soon. We'll see some remarkable scenes, hopefully of joy, in the next few days amid the very grim news that we've seen out of there over the past 6 weeks.